everyone, I'm Madina Elmi with the Minnesota Daily. Welcome back to another episode of In the Know, a podcast dedicated to the University of Minnesota. This year, our environment has been the center of attention in the news, social media, and in political landscapes. A couple weeks ago, wildfires in Canada and northeast Minnesota caused the air quality in the Midwest to plummet. But one of the largest concerns are AI data centers and the ongoing national discussion about their environmental repercussions. Over the last few months, environmental activists across the country have attended local city council hearings and made their voices heard to stop the construction of future data centers. And Minnesota residents are a part of that fight. I wanted to better understand the impact these data centers could have and the legal battles being brought against them. So for this episode, I spoke to a recent environmental engineering graduate from the University of Minnesota, an attorney for the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, and a local reporter who has been investigating the local impact of data centers themselves. Shayne Tarquinio is an investigative reporter here at The Daily. She recently wrote a piece exploring the consequences of these data centers in Minnesota. Tarquinio said, data centers have been around for years to store digital footprint, but as AI technology develops, it demands more from our environment.
Now that we have a society and a world that is very technology driven, data centers are kind of a necessity right now, at least with the technology that we have right now, in order to store all of the photos that we take, the videos that we take, the emails that we send, our Excel sheets. Artificial intelligence demands vast amounts of data and access to vast amounts of data. And so that's why we've seen this sudden boom of data centers all throughout the US, is because we're trying to keep up with feeding the artificial intelligence information.
Tim Ekblad was a former member of the Science and Engineering Student Board at the university and currently works at North Dakota-based environmental engineering firm, Advanced Engineering and Environmental Solutions. He said, data centers directly impact water supplies and sustainability.
One of the most important things I've learned, especially with data centers, is that they need clean water to cool it, and something has to happen to that water. What I'm learning is that the treatment plants, because it's such a new thing, don't always have the capacity to take on the water we use when we're flushing the toilet, plus all this extra water from the data centers. And they're getting close to maximum capacity, which is not good, because if that's reached at a facility, then a lot of times what happened is they have to bypass it and just take all this dirty water, skip the plant, and put it back into rivers, which is not what we want to see.
The land of 10,000 lakes is considered prosperous in terms of water, but unfortunately, resources are finite, and data centers risk pushing us past our capacity. Nationwide, spending on data center construction has spiked. As of 2026, $58.1 billion has been spent. Luke Norquist is an attorney for the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, a nonprofit based in St. Paul. He hears the many environmental concerns from Minnesota communities. Recently, many people have called MCEA to raise their concerns or ask questions about data centers. Norquist said, this kind of dedication to learn and speak up creates change.
So when we get those concerns about what can we do, oftentimes we're telling them about here's the ordinary process of environmental review and how you can participate. Since that hasn't been working very well right now, we've seen a lot of residents resorting to really impressive organizing in their neighborhoods and communities in places like Monticello and Hermantown and Pine Island to raise awareness about the issue and trying to think about what local regulations might be put in place to try and manage the impacts. And so we are seeing that across the state. Residents are getting really activated to try and say, can we do moratoriums at the state level to pause development while we figure out the best way to move forward? But it has been really impressive when we get those risks and concerns from residents to see how ambitious people have been taking things on in their own hands.
In terms of risks, data centers pose large threats to our water supply and grid stability. Data centers threaten to leave power grids vulnerable by acting as a highly volatile and concentrated point of consumption. Tarquinio and Norquist explained how these threats will drain our water supply and electricity, as well as potentially derail us from clean energy goals. Statistics find that data centers use an equal amount of energy as 100,000 households, and St. Paul has 124,000 households.
One of the researchers that I got to talk to, Stephen Pulaski, he's an environmental economics professor, and he just brought up the basics of supply and demand. If a massive data center is plugging into the energy grid supply, then they're going to be using a lot of that supply up. And so then the supply, perhaps, it can become more scarce. And when our resources are scarce, they become much more expensive. So I haven't done personal research on the blackouts, but it is a lot of new energy strain. I was talking to another researcher, Gabe Chan, and he works in the energy sector directly. And he said that this is just data centers are the center of gravity of these conversations right now because of how massive they are and how much they're changing everything.
What we see across many states that are facing massive data center projects is that the easiest way to get a massive new amount of electricity, like entire metropolitan cities worth of electricity to a single data center, to try and accomplish that as quickly as possible, because every tech company is trying to move as fast as they can to beat the other tech companies. The default solutions so far have been things like huge new natural gas plants or delaying the retirement of coal plants and other fossil fuel facilities. We have statutory commitments to achieve 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. We've made good progress on that so far, but it's a really ambitious target, and trying to satisfy that while also accommodating massive new demand from, a dozen plus hyperscale data centers, it's a real risk. And we have to try and manage the transition as best as we can and ensure that new data centers are powered with clean energy. But it's not a guarantee. And there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that data centers don't derail things.
The dangers that data centers pose have sparked protest around the country. Currently, most data centers in Minnesota are on hold. This moratorium is said to be caused by protesters voicing their concerns and giving companies time to process the outlook for the data centers. Ekblad emphasized the importance of community voices in making the change to stop damaging data centers a reality.
I know University of Minnesota is a very active campus politically. If there's something they don't like or want to see changed, they speak up for it. And I think people are definitely listening. I think it's a lot harder to make that change if you're looking at a red state, maybe like Oklahoma or Texas overall. But I think just the culture of Minnesota and the willingness of the students has shown a lot.
The Minneapolis City Council announced a 5-month pause on the creation of more data centers due to the catastrophic environmental impacts as well as significant pushback from Minneapolis communities. However, this pause does not include smaller data centers that are 350,000 acres or less. Tarquinio explained what this time is going to be used for.
City Council chose to do that just because we needed more time. We needed more information to understand how to really have these conversations with corporations or to try to understand really what the impact of data centers is going to be on our energy grid, on our water supply, on our environment, even on our economy. And so the moratorium is hoping just to gather more research, basically. And so they said that they have a few meetings that they're going to take and they're going to deploy certain kind of researchers out to really look at this and hone in on this. It is putting on pause a lot of data center development that's happening specifically in Minneapolis.
But what does this 5-month moratorium mean? The goal is to give data centers time to find solutions and hear people's concerns. But I wonder what this pause means for our environment. Norquist explained the long-term goals and expectations for this moratorium, and what we should hope to see going forward.
We've seen a wave of many cities passing moratoriums for up to 1 year on data center development. And it's in a lot of like outer ring suburbs where data centers have been focused on, but also in places like Minneapolis. They don't have active big data center developments, but are trying to get ahead of the issue. So we're seeing a lot of success at the local level in getting these things passed. There's also been a separate initiative at the state capitol to pass a statewide moratorium on data center developments for up to 2 years that would use that time to get a stronger permitting and review system in place so that when data centers come to Minnesota, we have a clear process with clear accountability for what exactly needs to happen to do this thing well.
One of the biggest concerns of the heated data center debate was a lack of transparency. Some Minnesota residents felt like companies and their lawyers were not sharing enough information about ongoing construction projects or legal actions. Tarquinio shared the concerns with secrecy that make communities feel uneasy.
City councils would sometimes have to sign NDAs, and that inherently broke a little bit of trust between the communities and their city councils. And that is something that I think the city councils are starting to realize also with the moratorium, and about how different communities, different towns have been dealing with this and been receiving pushback. I think they have made the choice to take some time instead of driving forward with development to really see what is happening here and how is this going to impact my community. And a huge part of that is how is it going to impact the environment, the place where my communities live.
Norquist touched on the legal action the Minnesota Center of Environmental Advocacy has taken, which includes 6 lawsuits. This nonprofit aims to keep these companies accountable.
You might hear something that's called like North Mankato Industrial. And it's not clear at the front end whether or not this light industrial development is a data center. And I think that sort of secrecy has created a lot of distrust among a lot of residents who come to us with their concerns. So, alongside the general secrecy, what is going on here type of concerns, there are a lot of questions about what can we do to manage the problems and risks here. And that is one of the reasons the MCA has been filing lawsuits on data centers. We've filed 6 lawsuits for 6 known or suspected data center projects in Minnesota. And a lot of that is because we have a process under state law called environmental review. There's the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, or Look Before You Leap statute. And the requirements under that state law are that when a massive project comes to town and wants to get shovels in the ground, the first thing they need to do is to have a study of the environmental impacts and make sure it is a process where the public can ask questions and share their concerns with the project and then get really clear responses from developers.
It's become clear to me that one of the most important things Minnesota residents can do is voice your concerns about data centers to your local city council, state, and U.S. representatives. Without public pushback, these crucial conversations will die, and we risk destroying our water and energy resources beyond repair. Ekblad said it's essential to be mindful of how we preserve our water supply.
The more data centers we build, the more strain there is on local water supplies, especially fresh water. When you look at how much water there is on the planet and then boil it down to how much fresh water there is and then how much of that we can actually use, it's really not a lot. And I think that puts it into perspective how valuable it is to kind of preserve what we have. Education is a big thing that we really need to implement so that future generations know the impact of these data centers. But I think worst case scenario is we lose a lot of our fresh water, and that has rippling effects on ecosystems.
Norquist emphasized the MCEA's mission to remind people of their rights to demand more action for our environment.
Our second goal is to support what we consider like environmental democracy, which is, there are a few tenets, but some of the basic ideas are that people have a right to access information about the projects that are coming to them and its environmental impacts, and they have a right to meaningfully participate in the process of how that project is developed and advanced. And so, like we talked about before, there are a lot of communities in Minnesota who are already thinking ambitiously and creatively about ways to do that. There are things related to the environmental review process like the comment periods where you can ask questions, raise your concerns. There's a petition process to say, under state law, if a project hasn't received environmental review, but you want it to, you can petition the city to do that.
After learning about the negative impact data centers can have and how much power our voices have to combat their destruction, I'm inspired by the action taken by Minneapolis communities and nonprofits like MCEA. I've learned so much by talking to Ekblad, Tarquinio, and Norquist on the importance of doing your research to better understand the ongoing conflict of interest between communities and companies. And I urge you as well, because these data centers have the opportunity to impact all of our lives. The Minnesota Center for Advocacy offers opportunities to understand our environment, reach out and ask questions, raise concerns, and better inform yourself. That's all I've got for this episode. Thanks for listening. This episode was written by Madina Elmi and produced by Grace Agner. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, send us an email at podcasting@mndaily.com. My name is Madina Elmi, and I'll see you next time on In the Know.